What if I told you that one of the most dangerous serial killers in American history lived next door to families, attended neighborhood events, and even helped search for his own victims? This is the true story of a man who fooled everyone, including the police who encountered him with a victim who could have been saved. Milwaukee, 1991. A distressed, disoriented teenage boy is found on the streets at 2 in the morning. Neighbors call the police. When officers arrive, they find a tall, blonde man calmly explaining that this is just a misunderstanding between him and his boyfriend. The police believe him. They escort the boy back to the man's apartment, despite neighbors' protests. They leave. Hours later, that boy is dead. His name was Konarak Synthasamphone. He was 14 years old, and the man who killed him was Jeffrey Dahmer. But this wasn't Dahmer's first victim. It wasn't even close. By that night in 1991, Dahmer had already murdered 13 people. And what makes this story even more chilling is that Konarak's older brother had been one of Dahmer's previous victims years earlier. The same predator had targeted the same family twice. Jeffrey Dahmer didn't look like a monster. He was quiet, polite, and kept to himself in his apartment at the Oxford Apartments complex. His neighbors complained about strange smells and odd sounds late at night, but no one suspected the truth. How could they? Dahmer would greet them in the hallway with a shy smile. He'd apologize for any disturbances. He seemed harmless. But inside apartment 213, a horrific reality existed that would shock even the most seasoned detectives. Dahmer wasn't just killing people. He was preserving evidence of his crimes in disturbing ways. Dahmer's method was calculated and deliberate. He would frequent bars and shopping areas, looking for vulnerable young men, often from marginalized communities. He'd offer them money for photographs or companionship. Once inside his apartment, he would drug and kill them. The scariest part? Dahmer had multiple close calls with police before that night with Konarak. He'd been arrested for indecent exposure. He'd been convicted of sexual assault of a minor. He'd been on probation during several of his murders. And still, he continued. The system failed repeatedly to stop him, and more people died because of it. As the summer of 1991 heated up, Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes were accelerating. He was killing more frequently, taking greater risks. Something had to give. And it did in the most unexpected way possible, when one victim did what no one thought possible and escaped. On July 22, 1991, a man ran into the street with a handcuff dangling from his wrist, screaming for help. His name was Tracy Edwards, and he had just escaped from apartment 213. Within hours, the world would know the name Jeffrey Dahmer, and the true scale of his crimes would make headlines across the globe. But how did Tracy survive when 17 others didn't? That evening started like Dahmer's other encounters. He approached Tracy Edwards at a shopping mall, offering him money to come back to his apartment for drinks and photographs. Tracy, struggling financially, agreed. When they arrived at the Oxford Apartments, everything seemed normal at first. Dahmer offered him a drink. They sat on the couch watching television. But then Dahmer's demeanor changed completely. Tracy noticed Dahmer's eyes go cold and distant. Dahmer suddenly snapped a handcuff onto Tracy's wrist and pulled out a knife, making violent threats. Then Dahmer dragged him toward the bedroom. And that's when Tracy saw disturbing evidence that confirmed his worst fears. Proof of previous victims. Tracy Edwards made a decision in that moment. He would do whatever it took to survive. He stayed calm. He talked to Dahmer like a friend, pretending to be interested in his stories, buying time. For hours, Tracy listened as Dahmer rambled about his loneliness and dark obsessions. Dahmer even forced Tracy to watch a movie while remaining threatening, explaining it was his favorite film. But Tracy was looking for an opening, any chance to escape. When Dahmer momentarily lowered his guard, Tracy punched him hard and ran for the door. He burst into the humid Milwaukee night with one handcuff still attached, flagging down a police car on the street. This time, the police listened. Officers Rolf Miller and Robert Roth approached apartment 213 with Tracy Edwards. Dahmer answered the door calmly, trying to explain away the handcuff situation just like he had done before with police. But this time, the officers insisted on looking around. When they searched the apartment, they made a horrifying discovery that confirmed Tracy's story. Dahmer was immediately restrained. As police continued their search, they uncovered extensive evidence of multiple murders, photographs documenting his crimes, preserved human remains, and other disturbing items carefully stored throughout the small apartment. The smell was so overwhelming that even experienced officers had to step outside. In total, they identified remains from 11 different victims in that apartment alone. But Dahmer's killing spree had started years earlier, in different locations, claiming even more lives. As detectives began interviewing him, Dahmer confessed to 17 murders spanning 13 years. And he confessed to something else that made investigators deeply concerned. He had been escalating. He wasn't planning to stop. His compulsions were growing stronger, and he had no ability to control them anymore. Tracy Edwards' bravery had ended a killing spree that might have continued for years. Jeffrey Dahmer sat in the interrogation room and confessed to 17 murders without showing remorse. But what he revealed about his motives was more disturbing than the crimes themselves. He didn't kill out of anger or revenge. He killed because he was lonely, and he wanted to create companions who could never leave him. Dahmer's confession lasted for weeks. He spoke in a calm, matter-of-fact tone about his crimes, describing his attempts to control his victims in ways that defied comprehension. What made Dahmer particularly terrifying to psychologists and investigators was his complete awareness of right and wrong. He knew his actions were evil. He knew his victims suffered. He simply couldn't stop himself. He described his compulsions as an addiction more powerful than any drug, something that consumed his every thought. He had tried to resist, he claimed, but the urges always won. The victims Dahmer confessed to killing ranged in age from 14 to 33. Most were young Black, Asian, or Latino men from vulnerable communities. Many were gay or bisexual in an era when being openly LGBTQ carried significant stigma. Dahmer specifically targeted people he believed wouldn't be immediately missed, exploiting systemic failures in how missing persons cases were handled for marginalized individuals. Family members had reported their loved ones missing, but investigations often went nowhere until Dahmer's arrest connected all the disappearances. Dahmer's trial began in January 1992 and became a media sensation. His defense team argued for insanity, claiming no sane person could commit such atrocities. But the prosecution painted a different picture. Dahmer was organized, methodical, and fully in control. He held down a job. He carefully planned his crimes. He cleaned up evidence. He successfully deceived police multiple times. After just 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Jeffrey Dahmer sane and guilty on 15 counts of murder. The judge sentenced him to 15 consecutive life terms, totaling 937 years in prison. Dahmer was sent to the Columbia Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. He was isolated from other inmates initially, but eventually requested to be placed in general population. He claimed he wanted to be punished, that he deserved whatever happened to him. On November 28, 1994, just 2 years into his sentence, Jeffrey Dahmer was killed by a fellow inmate named Christopher Scarver during a work detail. Dahmer was 34 years old. Some saw it as justice. Others saw it as an escape from the life sentence he deserved to suffer. But Dahmer's legacy didn't end with his death. His case exposed massive failures in the criminal justice system, in how police treated marginalized communities, and in how warning signs were repeatedly ignored. The families of his victims were left with unbearable grief and unanswered questions. And the world was left wondering how someone could commit such monstrous acts while appearing so ordinary. Jeffrey Dahmer proved that true evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it lives next door, smiles politely in the hallway, and hides unimaginable darkness behind a quiet, normal facade. And that's what makes his story so chilling. Thanks for watching Whisper of Dark. If this story sent chills down your spine, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We explore the darkest mysteries, unsolved crimes, and terrifying tales every week.